One of the major news that broken out, Alibaba coming out with their own AI inference chip. Is there something to be afraid of? Let's find out what we can. So first up, Nvidia. Let's talk about Nvidia's recent earnings, right? So these are the four biggest segments, how they are making money: data centers, gaming, professional visualizations, automotive. And from the look of where my mouse is hovering, the biggest segment for Nvidia out of these five segments, data centers. I just got to say that the other segments are not growing badly. It's quite good. The other segments are going at 49%, 32%, and 69%, 97%. The OEM is very small, but yeah, all are going quite well. And these are all like reinforcement that to say that no, Nvidia's products are useful and they're applicable to different segments, because this is the main revenue driver, and because of how they have positioned themselves, right? Moving forward, the focus I would like to put on is on the data center. It's just that because of the whole AI move, which is also why a lot of people are saying that the AI bubble is going to pop soon, right? Partially, it's also because of a lot of push in generative AI, and now we're moving to physical AI, which is something that Jensen Huang, the CEO, has been trying to bring the customers or the audience towards that direction. So as you can see, this company is highly profitable. They are 72% gross profit margin. In terms of net profit margin, they're around like 57%. So very profitable. Just some key updates, if you have not already known, is that they always wanted to do business with the world. And China is, of course, part of the world. But unfortunately, things don't work out because of the initial ban from Biden's time to Trump's time regarding the high-tech AI chips. They don't want all these high-performing AI chips, to be sent to China because they deem that this is a national threat, right? They have the point, right? But no, things getting better, because I think in July, Trump actually mentioned that, hey, we are open to letting you guys send in or sell your H20 Hopper series to China already. And that was in July. Some people just like to open their mouth, and the things that come out of the mouth is not good. So this guy over here, which is why, by the way, now this is Jensen Huang being very angry, and this is all the possibly done with the new AI, no, is it the photo function, but the image generator by Google. I'm very fascinated by this. I just thought that, hey, just shout out to this, right? I just sent a photo of someone and gave it some prompts to say, give me a Jensen Huang that's folding his arms, as well as giving me a pouty, unhappy face. So I managed to do it in a very clear manner. Basically, what happened here was that the US Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, he decided to say some things to say that to say something that made the Chinese very unhappy. And of course, because of that, right, China also had their plans initially to be less reliant on the AI chips from US itself. Right. So basically with this whole saga, right now, right, there's a lot of, I would say, like hurdles, and also there's a lot of push in terms of Chinese companies stepping up to sell their own AI chips. I think one of the bigger ones would be the Cambricon. Yeah, Cambricon is one of the more highlighted one because it seems to be the natural growth, the bigger growth company as compared to like Huawei. Okay, yeah. So the whole scenario with what the U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard what he mentioned actually caused Chinese sites to really push for self-sufficiency, right? For Beijing, they're aiming for 100% of local manufactured AI chips, and for the other areas, right, they are looking at around 70% by 2027, and that's just like close to 1 year and 3 months, right? Yeah, this is something that I think might result in Nvidia not getting any business from China, which also meant that they didn't wanted to factor in the Chinese sales, and that's why during the earnings they really exclude a lot of this potential stuff. But that is a key reason, right? I mean, like even though when Donald Trump side of things actually say that, hey, actually moving forward, the Chinese parties that want to buy the H20 Hopper series chips, right, all they need to do is to get license, and as long as they got this license, right, you guys can sell. On the caveat that they have to pay the US government 15% of the revenue generated, right? So I would expect this is coming from the Nvidia side. So far, I'm not very clear what is going on. And to date, right, based on the earnings, right, they also mentioned that the government haven't been completely stated out that what is the requirement, what is the regulations behind it for them to sell. So with that said, Nvidia is not selling, even though some of their clients already have the license. But I think that's actually a bigger reason why they don't want to sell the H20. So my take is that actually the reason why they don't want to sell H20, firstly, is this. This is a slide that was presented when the Blackwell series was first launched. But what this graph actually tells me one thing, when I saw it, right, it's very clear. Right, it tells me one summary. And the summary is that between the Hopper series and the Blackwell series, the Hopper series sucks. And why do I say so? As you can see, this is how the capabilities of it, right? You can see that Hopper series is only like up to, I think, 200K of TPS. But anyways, you can see that the performance, right, is like from 200K and is decreasing along as you're optimizing for faster response. But as compared to a Blackwell series, right, you can see that it's like going to near to 1 million. And the one that they match or they say that is equivalent comparison, right, is over here, and this is 40 times, right? So this is to China, this is to US and other regions, right? So can you see that there's a disparity in terms of the performance? But of course, let's say things are moving forward. If I'm the Chinese, I also won't buy this anymore. It's obsolete already. And that is why moving forward, there's a lot of Chinese chips coming up with their version that is of comparative to Hopper or even to A100, which I'll go through in a short while. So with this chart itself, right, it's clear to say that H20 is an old product, and moving forward, Nvidia wants to sell a better chip to China because, right, they also know that this chip has been around for a while, and the Chinese are definitely not happy, right? It's slow. To them, it's slow and it's also expensive. Why should I buy from you? So from Nvidia's point of view, they want to continue to grab some Chinese market share, hopefully when the whole restriction to the US export is lifted. And actually, right, here's the actual reason I feel that Nvidia don't want to sell the H20 chip, is actually because they are developing the next chip for the Chinese parties, right? And this chip is termed as B30A, okay, B30A. So B30A, right, from this graph itself, right, is basically the highest end chip that Nvidia have, which is B300. I think it's Blackwell 300, right? That's the highest performing chip right now that Nvidia has. And what Nvidia wants to do is to create this B30A chip is actually 50% of B300 chips performance. Let's find where H20 is here. H20 is here. The total processing performance is close to, I don't know, very little. But now H20 potentially is going to upgrade to B30A, and it has, I don't know how many folds is that, at least 3, right? Because yeah, at least 3 times the performance. So I think this is a very big upgrade for the Chinese, and I think if they are able to sell this, oh, the money is going to come in. But of course, again, just want to reiterate that this series is not approved yet, right? The approved one is still B20, but looking at how they want to gatekeep their own products, right? I really hope that Nvidia's B30A can be sold, right? Potentially licensable, so it's still in talking grounds. Yeah, so this is the reason why B20 is not going to be obsolete. It's going to be obsolete, and then that's why they're going to focus. But if you can see the performance improvement, right, it's going to be such a big jump, right? I have my reservations from the government side where they will say that, hey, wow, this sounds too much already. Like, why is it this quick? Yeah, for now, I think the best thing is to just wait for the people who are deciding on this. Okay, yeah, I think that's where I want to move the focus into the next part where I think Nvidia is having their leadership in this, right? And the leadership is Jensen Huang's style, right? After reading part of the Nvidia's Way, this is the book that is actually released in December 2024. I highly recommend you to have a read to find out the full story in terms of how Nvidia was founded, how they've gone through so many rounds of downtime, and what made Jensen Huang realize that they have to do something different, right? By not removing the whole hierarchical layers in a normal corporate company. And also things like how they have this 1-year rhythm going on, right? So I think this is the reason why, for me, Nvidia, even though there's so many competitors out there, they are still the leading one. And the reason is because they continues to innovate and innovate every single year. And why is this the case? Let me just recall some of the stories that I read in this book itself. Is that Nvidia back then was working for Intel, or they were competing with Intel and the other players, and they realized one thing very, very interesting is that for these companies, for them to develop a new chip, right, it takes a lot of years, and then that's just on the hardware side. But every time there's a new chip, you have to update the software side of things, and for Nvidia side is CUDA . Okay, so if the hardware improves, the software don't catch up, right, don't increase, right, and it's not up to date, it cannot be used in the current software version. I hope I'm like laymaning it down. So basically what it says is that the lead time to create a product A to product B, right, takes a long time to do it. So in between, right, while you're building, right, from product 1 to product 2, right, in between this process, what if somebody have come up with your product 2 in the mid of your year? That's it, right? The product 2 that you want to launch is obsolete already there. And then what this means is that you have to then start again to build a new prototype, a new product. And he realized that if they were to do that, they're going to be in big trouble. And at that point in time, they were still a very small company. So what he realized is that, hey, sometimes we just need to innovate a little bit by a little bit, right? So maybe from version 1, after we have launched our hardware chip itself, for the next 1 year, right, part of our team, let's focus on the version 2 of this chip series they want to do. And in between this process, another team is actually thinking of how to upgrade the software sides and other areas. So in other words, what they show you here is that they already have a pipeline for year 2, they have a pipeline for year 3, and these are all managed by each individual teams. In other words, they're running 3 teams for 3 teams and concurrently, all working for different years ahead of products. So this is why I feel that after reading the book and understanding a little bit about this pipeline, I finally understand why they can show this. It's because of whatever I just shared with you, the arrangements, the plans they have, that Rubin is actually maybe 2 years back project. It's just that this year's project launch is from Blackwell, next year then it's Bluebeam. And people that's when Blackwell was launched, maybe the third team is already working on the Feynman project already. Yeah, so this is why they can continuously to share every year. We're going to have new products and every year is going to get better and better. So these are just another reinforcement for me as an Nvidia investor to say that they are innovating much faster than a lot of the other peers. And because of that, right, even though they sell a lower end chip to China, and even later on when I'm going to address a little bit on the Alibaba's AI chip, right, these are to me just noises lah. Okay, yeah. And another thing that I think they focus a lot, and I just thought about sharing, is really on how they are thinking about the clients. And the clients now, because the biggest segment again we talked about is data centers, right? In data centers, the limitations is surprisingly not the space, it's surprisingly not the number of racks you can put, but actually it's the power. Okay, so the power is actually the limiting factors in terms of how many or how much computing power they can support their clients. So in other words, if they are using the older generations of Blackwell chips or even the past chips that's used in data centers, right? As you can see, looking at the right side of the picture itself, right, you can see that the amount of energy used for per token, right, back then, right, takes around like 42,000 over energy. But if you fast forward and see, right, actually for the Blackwell, right, they only take 0.4 joule. And then I don't know what's a good comparison in terms of joules to our human life, but from 42K per joule, joules per token can drop until 0.4. That's close to 100,000 times of decrease in terms of the energy use. And because the energy used per token is now so little, right, they can now allow all the big models that uses a lot of training and inference tokens, right, to produce more things. And this is moving forward more the way they're actually going to do to make it more efficient. And that's why when I was going for one of this sustainable climate sustainability like a workshop, they also shared that AI actually is not very good for the economy, it's not good for the environment because it uses a lot of energy. But knowing that the amount of energy that's being used moving forward is going to get lesser and lesser, hopefully it can go even lower, but I don't know. And with that in mind, it tells me that Nvidia also is very concerned about the power that's being used, the amount of things that's being generated. And these are all what their clients are looking for as well. Right? So these are some of the sustainable side, or maybe more for the client side to say that, hey, as an Nvidia, I'm not just selling you chips, I'm also helping you to create more opportunities, reducing costs and whatnot. But coming back again, why is there a 3.7% drop when Alibaba just announced their chip? Why? I think later on we'll go through that. But firstly, let's talk a little bit about the Alibaba's recent earnings. For me, I used to be, but I have exited a long time ago. And the reason is because I don't like regulatory risk. So like regulatory risk was something that was something that I didn't like back then. For any investors out there of Alibaba's that you have continued holding it, or you have when it was of a low, and I think our team Jun also scooped some shares inside. So very happy for you guys that participated or like hold through. And hopefully right now you guys have broken even, or even start to make some greens profits as well. So let's go through a little bit more about the earnings before I coming back to tell about Nvidia as well as Alibaba's case of the AI chips saga. So just a quick snapshot of their earnings, right? They are doing quite well, right? In fact, you can see that the revenue side is growing 10% after excluding some segments. We'll talk about that in a short while. China e-commerce is growing very well. The cloud segment is growing even better, right? 26%, the highest among the different segments. And the international ones, our Lazada, our Trendio, I think not so prevalent in Singapore and Malaysia, but yeah, the international segment is also growing very well. In other words, the company is doing quite well for all four different segments in terms of revenue. Yeah, and from the earnings call, what I gotten right is that they're already shifting themselves from the value stock and positioning themselves as the growth story again. As you can see, this is one of the first few slides from their earnings presentation. You can see that they're focused a lot on the growth side of things. They're really talking about how they want to invest more into AI, the cloud. Yeah. So let me share a little bit more about what are the three or other segments as well. Okay, so in other words, you can see that the main three segments that are either profitable or about to be profitable, which is the international ones, are doing quite surprisingly they're not doing very well. You can see that for Alibaba's China e-commerce group, as compared to last year, it's actually dropping in terms of the profitability. We'll cover that. And on top of that, this one I think is a highlight for the international side because they are going to have an increase in terms of their adjusted EBITDA, meaning to say they're getting more and more profitable, but right now they're still not profitable. Which one is the biggest? Based on the revenue, the biggest is still what they do best, which is their bread and butter in China. Okay, and for the cloud one, it's growing at 26% as I mentioned, but it's really profitable. All right. So first up, let's talk about the e-commerce space. On the top, I have the China side of things, and I just want to specifically highlight some of the key things. Is that first, they actually ventured more into the instant commerce, and the reason why is this. Before Alibaba went ahead to go about this instant commerce, meaning to say like they want to reduce the delivery time as much as possible so that their client, when they order, right, within X number of hours or less than a day, their clients will get the products. And if you are the user, if you are the buyer, getting this kind of experience maybe from Shopee, from Taobao, and then next day it's already at your doorstep. I think that's the dream of every single shopper out there. Instant. It's equivalent to you going down to the physical shop and they say, hey, I like this bottle. Okay, then you can just buy it on the spot. But instead of buying, they just deliver to your house. So that is the main reason why they also want to go into that, because the first company who actually started this concept, if I'm not wrong, is actually JD.com. Right, back then, they have this program called Speedy 211, right? So I think within from 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. or something like that, you will receive your product or something. Yeah, they started there because I think their products is more on the higher end stuff, so maybe the margins make sense. But following suit, Meituan, which focus a lot on the delivery for food and whatnot, they also come in and also wanted to fight in this space. They also want to be presented as we have this instant or we have this short delivery time. And naturally, Alibaba being the giant in this space, they don't want to lose out. And the reason why they want to go into this is, of course, to fend off against Meituan, fend off against JD.com. But there is a bigger reason why they want to do it. And the reason is quite simple, because they have so many different segments, right? They not only have what's it called in the China segment, they have the logistics side of things, right? So they just wanted to see how we can utilize and make the whole ecosystem efficient. Basically, these three companies have their own version of the instant commerce, right? It became to a part where, I think the regulatory bodies were saying like, hey, you guys are do this kind of instant commerce, okay lah, but to get their customers attracted to this function, right? They start to roll out. I think back then was this 0 yuan delivery or 0 yuan discounts or a lot of these promotions, right? For you to get on board to see that, hey, wow, if I buy a chargy, right, it can be delivered to me very fast, and back down it's like maybe free. Yeah. So this kind of things resulted in these three companies to pour a lot of resources and money into making sure that, or making the whole delivery pricing to be either zero or very low. And of course, this is not good for the other parties that are doing delivery, because you got a free delivery versus a paid delivery. Which one will you choose? Eventually, people will go for the free one, right? The government also want to see that this is happening, and this actually might cause some deflationary actions in the economy, which is not really doing well, right? This is just to reiterate that they are fighting for this because they're fighting this whole e-commerce space, and because of that, right, Alibaba from themselves, right, you can see that they have put in so much resources that the cost of it actually increases, which is why even though their revenue has grown 10%, which is amazing by the way, right, the adjusted earnings before earning interest, tax, as well as amortization, right, has actually went down, and it's 20%. Right, so if you're just looking at numbers and you don't understand the whole story to why they want to do this, right, then this 21% drop could be a very big flag. And because this is the biggest segment in terms of their revenue, right, this is not something that many people can absorb or digest. But they see that this is only a part one of their whole ecosystem integration. They have so many segments that is working very well. They just wanted to see how they can optimize it. And I think one segment was to talk about how AI can be part of this whole optimization process, right? So later on, I will touch on that. Okay, so now the second segment, which is the international commerce segments, right? AliExpress, Lazada, Baba.com, right? All this, you can see that it's increasing, right? But I'm more happy that they optimize it such a way that, wow, the cost of doing, or the cost of what they are operating, right, is actually increasing drastically. If you can see that, type in a 1 in the chat. It's crazy. Not only they increase in revenue, the bottom line is also like increasing for more than like $3 billion RMB lah. So this is, I think, one of the highlights for this quarter, because once this go profitable, right, they have three big segments that is profitable. And what that means, it means to say they're going to have more free cash flow. They're going to have more resources to work around to even scale the business to fight against their competitors. Yeah, so these are just some of the things that, having a profitable business does to you lah. So it's never a bad thing. But of course, again, I mentioned the first slide of this Alibaba segment is that they are focusing a lot on the growth. And the growth story is actually AI and cloud, right? So this is natural lah. Alibaba Cloud is something that they want to grow, and because of AI, right, they actually mentioned that a lot of people are adopting a lot of these AI products that they have, and this resulted in the revenue side to actually increase, right? But the good thing about this is that they also mentioned that for the past 8 quarters, the AI side is actually increasing even more. It's not even 26%. It's increasing at triple digit, right? Even though I didn't see the numbers, but more than 100%. Wow. So it means to say at least double every single quarter. It's just crazy. Yeah, so this is why they really want to position themselves in terms of how they want to grow the business and pouring a lot of resources into here, apart from the two bigger segments, because they see that AI is something that will stay. And as more people want to use AI, they're going to use more computing power. And because of that, they need more the more data is going to be produced, more things are going to be needed to store, and these are all good things for a cloud company, right? So naturally, having more investments inside here to support this whole segment is going to be very useful. You got money supporting you from the other segments to fund your operations. That's why having different segments in the business is very good. So in summary, what I just covered for Alibaba's case or their earnings, right, is basically telling me that they want to use commerce as their cash generator, and this cash, when they're going to use it, they're going to grow the company through the bigger segment that they have opportunity to grab, and that is your cloud, that is your AI side of things. And that is why with the support from US government to say that, hey, we want to sell you, we don't want to sell you the US AI chips. It is the best opportunity for them to develop their own chips. And that is why this happened. So the next part, let's talk a little bit about how Alibaba, whether they are really winning Nvidia. So just some recap, was just go back to a few years ago, back in 2019. This was the first time that Alibaba announced their first AI chip, right? This is their first AI chip, and it's called Hangang. Okay, the joke is very late. Okay, by the way. Okay, yeah, so this is the first AI chip back in 2019, and I think it was lagging behind to the extent that you can see that, so bad, so lagging behind Nvidia's product in terms of inference output, throughput, sorry, by 40 to 60%. And basically, they have a shitty chip as compared to Nvidia. Which is why at the point of time, 2019, all the way until recently, right, people or Chinese companies are buying a lot into Nvidia's product before the ban, because not replacement, the substitute for Nvidia's chip is, especially if it's locally made, right, it's not good, right? And since then, Nvidia has grabbed, I think, close to 80 to 90% of the Chinese market, right? But a good thing about this is that, hey, since now the benchmark for Nvidia, right, is still Hopper 20, right, the H20, right? So what this says is that, hey, this new product, how good is it, right? Is that they expect it to rival the H20, something that is lower than this is now going to increase to close to H100. So it's a big jump as well, right? That's why I guess when this was announced, the market went a bit crazy because, oh no, now that Alibaba don't have to buy H20 anymore, means the Chinese revenue side is not going to grow. This is, I think, partially the reason why Alibaba is winning in terms of getting attention. But in terms of the actual thing, I would like to share my thoughts on it as well. Based on what I've gathered, even though the new chip is not as good as the best performing chip by Nvidia, right? But basically, for Chinese case, if they still have the push by the government to use local AI chips, right? In other words, you just put more of these local AI chips, right? Using math, you just overcome the physical constraints on the chip level. So basically, this is what one of the CEOs mentioned. Yeah, which was something that back then, Huawei was, the chips is not as good, but because they can put in more chips, right, that is equivalent to having maybe 5 Huawei chip equals to 1 Blackwell chip, something like that. So it's not a very troubling thing. But actually, the truth about this Alibaba's new chip, right, that they want to develop runs on the very, very foundation that Nvidia has built on for many years, since I think in 2012, if I'm not wrong, right? And that is the CUDA, right? And if you don't know what CUDA is, basically, just now I mentioned that Nvidia, they have two different portions, right? One is the hardware, one is the software side of things. So if you have the hardware but you don't have the CUDA software, you cannot use the chips to its best abilities. Just simply put it that way. And for Alibaba, they actually make their chip such a way that they can and or are compatible to the CUDA system. And this is a good thing. This is a good thing because basically it's trying to say that, from what I getting, is that right now they're using a lot of Nvidia's product, right? Maybe they have bought previously. It's just that if they suddenly change to a new chip, if you, let's say you were on Nvidia's CUDA, suddenly you change to AMD or you change to Huawei one, right? Both are, the two other chips are running on another software. And if you're not on those softwares, then you have to go and learn how to use it, or you have to make it compatible first before you can start training your models or whatever on those new chips, right? So it's basically the Nvidia's own language, then AMD have their own language, then Huawei's chip also have their own language. If they don't know translation, they cannot translate, they cannot talk like Google Translate like that now, right? Then there's no way for you to work. So more downtime, yeah. So that's a bad thing. So by being Nvidia's software compatible, this ensures that Alibaba can sell this product to people who are still using Nvidia's lower end products. Can link. Just that you need to have the software, Yeah, but this also tells me this is actually a bad thing as well, because imagine they can find the right translation app to link up with Nvidia's CUDA. It also means to say Chinese products or Chinese companies no longer have to rely on Nvidia's software, which in other words means that they don't have to buy Nvidia's product. Yeah, because for them to get CUDA, you need to use Nvidia's hardware. Yeah, so you don't have the hardware, you only get the software. You can have the software, but you don't have hardware, then what's the point? Yeah, so that's why having both is important. Okay, which is also why this research was saying that Nvidia's dominance is not just in the hardware, but also in the software. And because they're built since the start of how they have position themselves as GPU, right? Which is, by the way, right, a term that they did back then at the start when they want to get out of just being a graphics card, right? So they term themselves as GPU, right? So this is just some fun facts that I found out while reading the book itself. Okay, so yeah, so this CUDA is very, I think, the hidden champion that is like pushing or still pulling the strings of all of its current customers, because if if you don't have this, right, basically people can just buy your chip and then do whatever they want. But because of this software, you have to conform to their requirements, and because you want to use their chips, you must learn how to, you must build your stuff or build your AI models on top of the CUDA library, which is why you can see that they help to speed up a lot of the processes or of this workload, right? After everything is inside this CUDA library. So right now, will this happen? Will there be 100% replacement from Nvidia's chip to local Chinese chip? I don't know, but let's find out in the next few steps. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the current market share in terms of how Nvidia, the other players are in, right? No doubt, Nvidia is having that huge boost in terms of the market share price, in terms of their revenue, is because they are still the leading person or leading company that does AI chips, 90% over inside this whole crowded space. And as mentioned, right, because of the yearly incremental innovation that they do multiple years ahead, they have a new product to share every single year, and then every year that change is not just a small little increment, like how nowadays the iPhone incremental change is just pathetic. It's basically like back then when the first iPhone, and then after that it improved so much, right? Yeah, that kind of incremental change makes sense for people to buy the new one, but if the incremental change is not, then yeah, it defeats the purpose of creating new products. Okay, so this is in terms of the whole AI chip. Then other people also saying that 80 plus 90% for this is a report by Morgan Stanley, right? So Morgan Stanley is also like projecting that Nvidia, right, is actually going to, in next year itself or this itself in future, right, it's going to be at least 77% of the whole market as well. So the consumption of all this wafer stuff. So basically, Nvidia in this sense is still the global leader, right? As for the next part, whether Chinese chips will replace them, Alibaba got their own cloud, as I mentioned. Baidu also come up with their own, Huawei come up with their own, Cambricon also recently is the hype, right? But the truth is this, when I was researching on this, it turns out the chips made by Baidu, the chips made by Huawei, most of these chips that they created or they announced to the world that they have, right, a lot of them, right, is used for internal purposes. Okay? So what this means is to say these chips are being used for their own corporate, I don't know, for their own machine learning or whatever not lah. It's not for external people to use. And because of that, right, do you think if it's being used internally, it's a threat to Nvidia? Yes or no? So if you think about it, if you created something, if I created this mouse and people say that, oh, Joshua, you are fighting in the mouse industry, right? You got your new mouse, but look at that, you got Logitech that sells the best or the biggest or the nicest mouse, right? I cannot consider myself competing with them because firstly, I'm just building this for myself. If I'm building a chip and I'm just using it for my own company, I don't sell to other people, how am I competing with you, Nvidia, in terms of the chip revenue? So in other words, let's focus on the companies that sells chips or use their chips to sell it to other people. And currently, from what I found, is Cambricon. It's not easy to pronounce. Cambricon, I think Alibaba. So these are the two coming ones. So in other words, if I were to put in the players that sell their chips outside to the corporate or into B2B space, right, I will include the Cambricon. Okay, so this was the same graph, just that I added some of the new information, which is the two products, the two AI products from Cambricon, right? The MLU 590 and the MLU 690, right? So MLU 590 is the first or the older product, and its performance is close to 80% of A100 Nvidia's chip, right? So as you can see, again, it's not the best, it's not performing, right? But the second one that they have like launched is actually the MLU 690, and this is where it's actually comparable. It's actually the same. They say that it's the same performance as H100, just that if I put the same box, then you cannot see the box. But basically, they have the same function as H100, right? So this is the latest or the small brother of Nvidia, and is selling that story, which is why a lot of people say that, wow, because of this curve, because of this local AI sustainability, right? This company, because they sell their chips to local, right? They are going to have a lot of sales, right? They're going to don't know how many X their revenue, which from the latest year result, it really did explode a little bit. But the thing is coming back again. The best product out there by Chinese company is still at H100. But where is Nvidia's product? Nvidia's product is currently here, right? And that is the Blackwell series. Just now I show you the snapshot of the rubrics, the two other series. Because of that, right, you can see that the draft difference from Nvidia's product and Chinese product is still very far. If you can see that, type in a 1 in the chat. Yeah, so to me, it's clear as the sky can be today, because it just rained, is that you can have Chinese competitor, you can have a US competitor, whatever it is. But if your product cannot even compete with this one, which is 50% of the best product they have right now, then are you really a threat to Nvidia? I would beg to differ. I would say that it's not, right? Even the, I wouldn't call 半价, but the 50% performing chip is already much better than whatever latest chip there is. So I think for me, I would like to find out like this the Alibaba's new chip, where does it float in this graph? And then it's easier to make a comparison. But like Rupert, what you guys mentioned inside the chat, right? It's like fair chance they can be here because the previous one was already only somewhere here, right? So for them to jump so much, either they really copy paste Nvidia's product design or whatever not. But yeah, who knows, right? Until then, for now, I think this whole drop right itself is basically more of a noise, right? For an investor like myself, I'm not so affected by it, right? And I really do agree that understanding how the company management thinks really matters. So if you can find time to go and read this book, because I think you already learn a lot on how the three founders actually spearheaded or they tied through this multi-year journey. Okay, actually, this is the end of the live segment for our free users, but because of today's technical difficulties, you're in for a treat because, I just wanted to share my updates in terms of this company, right? That sadly made me have 30% loss. Right, I will share some of my findings from this company's recent earnings, but at the same time, I also like to share some of the thought process, some of the action steps that I did or did not do, right, which resulted in this whole experience. Before that, if you are somebody that is working on an AI project and if you are given a chance, which one will you choose? You will choose outside of Beijing, or you work in Beijing for your AI project, where you can only be using local chips? Which one will you choose? Outside or inside? Outside, no brainer, right? If I can use potential way better performing AI chips that Nvidia can provide, maybe not all of them, but 30%, why not, right? And right, to rehash, Alibaba is actually building AI inference chips. For AI chips, actually they're split into two different, I wouldn't say type, but two different categories. One is more strong in inference, which is where you chat with it or you create something. One is more for training, right? So training is the one that is more taxing or it needs more capabilities, needs more performance, which is why when it comes to training, right, Nvidia's chips really do very well. But for Alibaba, they are actually focusing on developing the inference, which means is to say it's not the heaviest weight chip, right? If you can understand this, what it means is to say you still need to have a very strong training performance chip. And if you don't use Nvidia's one, if you don't use a good quality one, then you have to use a lot of the bad quality ones, right? So then it might not be the best, right? What I saw some of the forums or the articles is to say, okay, for the inference, let's use the Chinese one, right? Let's use the Chinese one. But for training purposes, let's use the maybe H20, right? Let's use the H20 because the capability is much more, right? So in other words, a lot of these AI companies in China are probably still going to go with the hybrid model. So for now, at least, it won't be a full annihilation of Nvidia or boycotting Nvidia. Yeah, so I really hope there's going to be good developments in terms of how Nvidia can sell products into the Chinese market. And if this B38 is going to be approved, then it's going to be even a better thing.